We are hardwired for scarcity and always searching for more. This wiring was necessary in the past for our survival and manifested as always searching for the basic necessities of life so that we could have enough. But today is very different, especially if you live in a country of overabundance. Our needs are largely taken care of and require minimal physical effort on our part. And those needs that we have on a day-to-day basis, usually we do have enough to meet them. Yet that hardwiring for more remains a part of us and is going to manifest differently than in the days of our ancestors, such as constantly seeking more money or more material possessions. If left unchecked, this perpetual desire for more can come at the cost of truly enjoying what we have today and can even be at the expense of others and the only earth that we have to call home. This is why I think it is important now more than ever to discuss what it takes to find our enough and live with deeper contentment in this world where there's just so many choices and so much stuff. While I think that the desire for more manifests in more areas of our lives than simply just money and material possessions, these are the two that I wish to discuss in deeper detail today. I believe one of the greatest challenges in finding our enough is the fact that our survival is tied to the money that we earn. While it was very easy to discern back in the day when our needs were met, when our survival depended more on our direct physical efforts, it's become much more ambiguous with money, especially because the amount that we need to cover our basic costs and needs is always changing. Most of us need to learn how to manage our money and have a basic understanding of economics before we can effectively use money as a tool for survival. And even when we do get a handle on money, we have the tendency, we're susceptible to always chasing the next big number and just never knowing when enough is enough. The book Money Zen explains this phenomenon by saying that when we hit a new target, we become accustomed to a new level of success and suddenly we want more. I think one of the reasons that we keep increasing the target has to do with our need to plan ahead in order to survive. So back in the day, we needed to plan ahead in order to procure food and shelter, but because we need money to meet those basic necessities nowadays, and it's become much more ambiguous to know how much of it we need, I think that our planning ahead brains are constantly just asking ourselves, well, how can I make more of it? It's like our primal brains are trying to reassure us, you can never have too much money. More money will make you feel safe, secure, and provided for. More money will help you feel like you have enough. Much the same way that maybe our primal brains might have reassured us in times past, you can never stop planning ahead for the next hunt. Bringing back meat to the village will help you feel safe, secure, and provided for. Although we may feel like it never hurts to chase more money, and we crave that reassuring feeling of feeling safe, secure, and provided for by seeing the numbers go up, the reality is that there is a correlation between overabundance and depression and anxiety. Some of the most wealthy, abundant nations in the world have the highest rates of these. Now, this isn't to say that if you are monetarily wealthy, you are for sure going to be depressed, but I do think that it is important to be aware of this correlation if we find the chase for more money becoming relentless in our lives and is preventing us from fully enjoying what we have today. Perhaps it is a good idea to challenge our wiring and contemplate what enough money feels like or is to us, taking into account inflation and rising costs as well. Now, I don't necessarily have a 5-step process for you to follow that will help you determine what your enough number is for you. For that, I recommend reading the book Money Zen, The Secret to Finding Your Enough by Manisha Thakur. I'll leave a link down in the description box, although I recommend seeing if it's at your local library first. But I do have some thoughts that I want to share with you today that hopefully will be of value to you in contemplating what enough money feels like to you. When contemplating what enough money feels like to me, I take into account Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I ask myself, what sum of money will allow me to cover my basic needs, connect deeply with others and have a sense of belonging and community, and experience meaning, purpose, and fulfillment? Now, if you're anything like me and you think that's kind of a loaded question and you have a hard time figuring out a number that encompasses all of those needs being met, instead you can ask yourself, are all of these needs met on a regular basis? If so, then you probably do earn enough. But if you find that there are certain needs that aren't being met on a regular basis and you feel like there's something missing in your life, I do think it's worth taking the time to figure out what costs are associated with meeting those needs. And while not every need needs to be met with money, I do think that it is a currency that flows through almost every aspect of our lives. And we need to consider that. I think we would be kidding ourselves if we thought that we could meet all of those needs without money. For example, I usually have enough to cover my basic needs. I think that that is something that flows fairly easily to us in wealthy, abundant nations, but certain needs up higher on the hierarchy are not so easily met, unfortunately. For example, community. It can be really difficult to have a strong sense of community when you live in a wealthy, abundant nation where things are a little bit more individualized. And I think what I'm going to do is take some time to consider how I want to foster community in my daily life, and then just research the costs associated with fostering community, even down to the gas money that I have to spend getting myself places. Because even if meeting up with your friend is technically free, to an extent, you are still paying for that because you likely had to drive your vehicle to get there. Or maybe you could walk. Some things are completely free, and that is great, but for myself, figuring out the costs of each of the activities that I want to do will personally help me come up with my enough number. Now, even if we have all of those needs in the hierarchy met, there is this primal-like tendency to worry we may not have them in the future. Therefore, we miss out on enjoying our enough today because we're worried about having our enough in the future as well. It's almost the equivalent of our ancestors feeling full after a meal, but still having to plan ahead and think about where they're going to find their food tomorrow. And I think that whenever we find ourselves kind of trapped in worrying about the future when really we have all of our needs met, I think we need to just gently remind ourselves that it's possible to recognize that we have enough today while planning ahead for the future so that we can have enough then as well. I am currently reminding myself of this often because I have a lot of ambitions and goals that I'm working towards that will allow me to have enough in the future. And sometimes if you become so fixated on that, you really do miss out on enjoying fully what you have today. In my previous video, I mentioned my dream plan of having enough in the future. And if you're curious to hear more about that, I'll link the video somewhere in this one. But for now, I'll just briefly share with you what that dream plan was and is. And that is saving up for a tiny house and basically having no mortgage, a reduction in expenses, thus lessening the pressure of always having to think of how to earn more in this economy so that I can focus on living out my enough, living simply, working a job that I enjoy versus a job that pays a lot and that maybe I don't enjoy as much. And in this process, I'm reaching for more and planning ahead for more, all while practicing gratitude for the enough that I have today. Now, even if we do remind ourselves of our enough on a daily basis, we may not feel 100% content all of the time, and that's okay. But I do think that having a daily gratitude practice does lead to deeper feelings of contentment. And that's really what this is about. Not feeling content 100% of the time and setting ourselves up for unrealistic expectations, but simply striving for deeper feelings of contentment and satisfaction in life. My own daily gratitude practice looks something like this. I usually take my journal, and before I go to sleep at night, I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And it's usually things that happen to me during the day. And this primes my brain to look for things that I'm grateful for the next day as well. And so all around, I just find that it helps me to enjoy life more. So if you don't already have a daily gratitude practice, I highly encourage you to start one. And if you do have one, I would love to know down in the comments more about your own practice. Let's talk about material possessions next. At what point in our history did we start becoming materialistic? We may think of our hunter-gatherer ancestors as minimalists who used only what they needed to survive, but the truth is that human beings have been seeking out novel objects, non-utilitarian objects, for a very long time. For example, the Cro-Magnon, who lived 10 to 40,000 years ago, sought out ochre, amber, and seashells and used them purely for decorative purposes. I personally think it is fascinating that human beings find beauty in the matter that surrounds them, and we take that matter and we transform it into our own beautiful creation. And we have our own different styles and tastes. But at the same time, if you drop this desire for shiny new things into a capitalistic industrial trade system, it creates a recipe for human beings trying to profit off of one another in any way that they can so that they can have their more or their enough. And this often happens at the expense of others and the environment. While in pre-industrial times, much of what we created, sought out, and traded went back to the earth after it was done being used, with little to no negative effect on the environment. But today, the mass production of all of the stuff that we create on an industrial level creates so much toxic waste and trash, and it's just really sad. Our desire to create and trade with one another, I think, is a beautiful part of our humanity and is to be celebrated. But I feel as though our desire to create and consume has gotten a little bit out of hand in this current industrial capitalistic trade system. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves, how can we consume more mindfully so that we are not living at the expense of others and the environment? Now, this is a really big problem to tackle, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but that's not going to keep me from talking about it and at least trying. And there's a lot of advice out there on how to consume more mindfully, but allow me to just share my 2 cents. Let me start off by saying that I do not think that mindful consumption should rest solely on the shoulders of consumers. I think in an ideal world, everyone participating in this capitalistic trade system would create with the end in mind, thinking of both the earth from which the creation comes from and the consumer. And this idea comes from a book called Think Indigenous. I will link it in the description as well. And I think that it's a really important mindset to take on in this day and age, because right now we are just living in an era of trash and discarding whenever something just breaks or whenever it's outdated. And I think we need to challenge that and learn differently. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could profit off of each other's desire to collect and trade while thinking of the environment and the end result of that product and thinking of how it's going to decompose in the earth? While there are companies who do try to practice sustainability, I think that as long as money and profit are the goal, it's going to be very difficult to change people's mindset around this. So with that being said, I think that we do the best that we can within the world that we live in, and we push for change where we can. And I don't really know how to do that, I will be upfront, but if anyone has any ideas of how to push for change on a larger scale when it comes to our consumption, I would love to hear from you. I'd like to talk about how to consume more mindfully on an individual level now, because that just feels very accessible for me, and it feels like something within my control, within my power. And so that is something that I want to talk about next. At some point in our history, these non-utilitarian objects that we thought were cool and beautiful started to become status symbols. And around what time, I can't pinpoint for sure, but I do know that hunter-gatherer societies were more egalitarian, and when agricultural practices arose in our societies, there started to be more hierarchies and consequently probably more status symbols as well. And we've definitely carried over the mentality and desire for status into our modern day with things like really expensive fancy cars and big mansions, things of that nature. I think that at this point in our evolution, we've determined that hierarchies are generally not beneficial for everybody in society, and that the disparity between the wealthy and the poor is becoming too great, and that we need to try and go back to having some sort of egalitarianism. And so because we've realized this, I think it follows that these status symbols aren't necessarily helping with that. And I think we need to challenge our desire to show off just for the sake of showing off, so that we can practice more mindful consumption and not use more than we need. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be an extreme minimalist who only uses what they need. I think that everyone has different interests in various physical objects, and that's okay. I think you can like cars and not necessarily have it be a status symbol. I just think that we need to take those interests that we have and ask ourselves how we can practice mindful consumption with them. So for example, even when it comes to cars or technology, if something breaks, we can see if maybe it can be fixed. And if it can't be fixed, then we can see if we can purchase something secondhand to replace it. If we can't do that, we can see if we can buy from a company that practices more sustainably or more ethically. And if that's not possible, then you may just have to ask yourself if the possession that you desire is really truly necessary in your life. And sometimes it will be, and sometimes it's just about kind of having a cost-benefit analysis happen in your mind, where you ask yourself how much value this possession truly is going to bring to you, and if it's going to help you live in alignment with your values. I just think that it's not about perfection, it's about making some sort of effort, because if you tell people to be perfect when it comes to their consumption, it's just going to feel impossible. And I think part of the reason for this is the fact that most of us have grown up in this world where we're used to a certain standard of living. We're used to having a car to get around in, and we're used to living in houses with heating and electricity. And so to tell someone to live completely off the grid with no footprint on this planet, it's not possible. We're all going to have an impact to some degree. It's just about lessening that degree if possible. When you look at our history, it's clear that this impulse for more is neither good nor bad. It's simply a part of our humanity. I think that sometimes in this world of over-consumerism, we have the tendency to deem the minimalist, the person who's content with very little, more morally virtuous than the person who always seems to be chasing more and is never satisfied. Now, I think that minimalism has some very helpful ideas, and I'm grateful that it arose kind of in rebellion to the over-consumerism that's happening. But I don't think that we should necessarily stifle our desire for more. Instead, I think that we need to understand where this impulse comes from, understand it through the context of our evolutionary history, and how some of our instincts may be impacted by the modern day environment in which we live, the instinct for more included. I think learning about this will help us to have some awareness around how we are susceptible to being taken advantage of by others, especially big corporations, and that way we can have more conscious pursuits in our lives and we're not just being behaviorally manipulated at our expense, literally. I think instead of adhering to some strict form of minimalism, we need to ask ourselves, how can we reach for more in the most positive and healthy ways, all while recognizing and appreciating the enough that we have today? I would love to hear your thoughts around this question and this topic down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I want to say thank you to everyone who commented on my previous video. I really enjoy engaging with you down in the comments, and I just want to say that I've learned a lot from everyone sharing, so I just want that to continue. So thank you in advance if you plan on commenting. And for those of you who are new to my channel, I am Carolyn, and I kind of wanted to give you a bit of an update on where I'm at with my channel, because I feel like as I continue to create and think about various topics, my channel's mission and niche, so to speak, just seems to be evolving and changing slightly. And so I just wanted to tell you where I'm at. So the more that I dig into this topic of awakening our wild and identifying the aspects of our humanity that have been stifled by domestication, capitalism, industrialism, the more I realize that there are certain primal instincts that we have that don't necessarily need to be awakened, but instead understood through our evolutionary history, and how those instincts could be, as I mentioned before, impacted by the modern day forces that we are subject to. Learning how our primal instincts are being exploited and taken advantage of in our modern day has become just as much a part of this journey as awakening my own wild instincts that have been suppressed. So if this speaks to you at all and you're interested in embarking on a similar journey, please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in another video soon.